It was supposed to be just another ordinary day when a black man returned home, but everything changed in an instant. A white police officer approached him right outside his own house, questioning why he was there. Moments later, handcuffs clicked around his wrists, and confusion filled the air. Neighbors began to gather, phones started recording, and tension grew thicker with every second. What led to this shocking moment? And what happened after would spark conversations no one saw coming. This wasn't just about one man or one officer. It was about something much bigger. Stay tuned to see how a single encounter outside a quiet home turned into a moment that would challenge perceptions and change lives forever. The man James had just finished a long day at work when he pulled into his driveway. This was his home, a place where he should have felt safe. But the officer didn't seem to believe that. A neighbor had apparently called the police, reporting a suspicious person outside the house. James tried to explain, calmly showing his keys and ID, but it didn't matter. The officer's tone grew sharper, his hand hovering near his holster. James' heart pounded as confusion turned into fear. Why wasn't he being heard? Neighbors whispered, some recorded, but no one stepped in. The officer's backup was on the way, and the situation was spiraling. Was this a misunderstanding or something deeper? The line between safety and threat blurred, leaving James trapped in a moment that felt bigger than him. What would happen when more officers arrived? And how far would this go? As more police cars pulled up, flashing lights painted the neighborhood in red and blue. James stood there, still in handcuffs, watching his quiet street turn into a spectacle. His neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who had lived next door for years, peeked from behind her curtain, shocked to see James in this situation. She knew him well, but had she been the one who called? Whispers rippled through the growing crowd. Some bystanders wondered if this was just a mistake, while others feared it was something more. Another example of racial profiling. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels, the one who cuffed James, started to question himself. The call had been vague, and James wasn't resisting. But now, with his sergeant on the scene, stepping back didn't feel like an option. Tension thickened as James' wife, Mia, arrived, her voice cutting through the noise as she demanded answers. Would anyone listen before things got worse? Mia's voice trembled with anger and fear as she demanded the officers release her husband. She waved the house keys in front of them, pointing to family photos visible through the window. But the officers hesitated, their radios crackling with updates. The sergeant exchanged tense words with Officer Daniels, questioning why James was still in handcuffs without clear evidence of a crime. The crowd grew louder, some shouting for James to be freed, others recording every second. James remained silent, his mind racing. He wondered if any move he made could be seen as a threat. Officer Daniels tightened his grip on his belt, sweat forming on his brow. More neighbors joined the crowd, recognizing James and voicing their confusion and frustration. The tension felt like it could snap at any moment. Then from down the street, a high-ranking officer arrived, stepping out of his car slowly. Every eye turned toward him, waiting for what would happen next. The high-ranking officer, Captain Reed, stepped forward, his face unreadable. The crowd fell into a tense silence, hoping he would finally end the chaos. But instead of ordering James to be released, Captain Reed turned to Officer Daniels and quietly asked, Asterisk, did you check the back of the house? Asterisk, Daniels froze. No one had mentioned anything about the back. Reed's eyes swept over the crowd, then back to James. Before anyone could react, two officers rushed toward the backyard. Moments later, a shout echoed, "We've got movement back here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mia's breath caught in her throat. James looked confused, shaking his head. "What are you talking about?" He called out, but no one answered. Within seconds, officers dragged out a man in dark clothing, struggling against their grip. He wasn't James' neighbor, and no one recognized him. The man locked eyes with James, a smirk creeping across his face. Suddenly, everything James thought he knew about that night shifted, and the danger wasn't over yet. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the mysterious man was forced to the ground, handcuffed and cursing under his breath. Captain Reed's face hardened. A quick search revealed burglary tools tucked inside the man's jacket. He had been breaking into houses in the neighborhood for weeks, blending into the shadows while suspicion had fallen on James. Officer Daniels slowly turned toward James, realizing the terrible mistake. His hand shook as he reached for the keys to unlock the cuffs. But before he could speak, James stepped back, his eyes cold and distant. Mia pulled James close, shielding him from the officers. The crowd, once filled with fear and anger, now buzzed with disbelief and guilt. But just as things seemed to settle, the captured man smirked and leaned in toward Captain Reed. "You think I was alone?" he muttered. Reed's eyes darted back to the neighborhood, scanning the dark windows. The night wasn't over, and neither was the danger. Captain Reed quickly signaled officers to sweep the area, checking every corner of the neighborhood. After a tense search, they confirmed there was no one else hiding nearby. The man in custody refused to speak further, leaving his cryptic warning hanging in the air. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse, though whispers of what could have happened lingered. Officer Daniels quietly unlocked James' handcuffs, struggling to find the right words. "I'm sorry," he muttered, but the damage was already done. James didn't respond. He simply turned to Mia, holding her hand tightly as they walked back into their home, his home. Neighbors watched in silence, some realizing how easily assumptions had fueled the chaos. That night became more than just an arrest gone wrong. It was a hard lesson about judgment, fear, and accountability. And for James, it was a reminder that even at home, safety isn't always guaranteed.